president of the National Electoral Council, Diana Tamaint, announced early elections and ratified its commitment to carry out an efficient and transparent electoral process. The government of Colombia and the National Liberation Army announced the resumption of the peace talks in Havana, Cuba, after the pause requested by the insurgent group. More than 130 deaths have been reported so far in Myanmar as a result of the heavy rains and strong winds from Cyclone Mocha. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm your new anchor, Heidy Maurell, from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. On Wednesday, at a press conference, the president of the National Electoral Council, Diana Tamaint, ratified to the Ecuadorian people the commitment to carry out an efficient and transparent electoral process. In addition, Tamaint advocated for the unity of all the entities involved in the electoral process to give greater tranquility to the country and strengthen Ecuadorian democracy in the midst of the situation it's growing through. Finally, the president of the National Electoral Council declared that the NEC will continue with the path of absolute respect for the popular expression manifested in the ballot box, recognized by the national political entities and civil internationalist organisms. He also announced that the deadline for the call of extraordinary presidential and legislative elections is May 24, 2023. That is 7 days after the issuance of the executive decree.
In order to have these deadlines to elections, we have 7 days. This is from tomorrow, this starts the deadlines, and that means that in the 24 May is the deadline to have the elections. We can have it. This not stop us from calling for elections. What we cannot do is to have the election after 24.
Additionally, Tamaint also refers to the clarity of the process and the promptness to carry it out.
We have to achieve in all of these, in the electoral campaigns, 3 weeks before. It's impossible to do it because we have not the time for that. That is why we have manifested that we are going to elaborate. We're going to elaborate some rulers in order to guarantee the domestic democracy, the debates, the campaigns, that they have the deadlines that we have within the 90 days. Regarding the resources that are within us, all the resources should be respected because it's a right. However, we should take into account that these deadlines would have to be very short without affecting the process.
The Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador, CONAIE, reacted to the decision of President Guillermo Lasso to declare the death cross, requesting the Constitutional Court to make an immediate statement on the situation.
We demand the Constitutional Court to pronounce itself immediately in accordance with the constitutional norm in force, to guarantee the rights of the democratic order and the Ecuadorian people, and not to allow a dictatorship disguised as a constitutional instrument.
Leonidas Issa also denounced that the government of Guillermo Lasso and his measures have led the country to the worst crisis in history.
The government and the neoliberal right-wing model has failed. What we have lived through is the right-wing model of government, and its main figure has led Ecuador to the worst economic, social, and political crisis and disaster in the history of our beloved country.
In this context, the CONAIE leader described it as a cowardly the decision taken by President Guillermo Lasso, assuring that there are no constitutional conditions to call for the cross death.
Lasso, like all cowards, declares the death cross to prevent the National Assembly, in the face of popular clamor, from dismissing him. In a moment of prison crisis where the penetration of drug trafficking mafias and organized crime penetrated the state, turning into a narco state with representatives linked to the President of the Republic in such a difficult scenario did not declare internal commotion. Lasso does not have any citizen support. He has been left with the state security forces against the will of the people.
Also in Ecuador, the former president of the National Assembly, Virgilio Saquicela, demanded that the Constitutional Court rule on the dissolution of the parliament decreed by President Guillermo Lasso.
Finally, he says that he dissolved the parliament due to internal crisis and social commotion. The background, the motivation, and the resolution do not match. What does this mean? That the Constitutional Court, before several actions of unconstitutionality with precautionary measures, must pronounce itself, and we demand that it pronounce itself immediately. It is a matter of national interest, not for the legislators to return to the National Assembly, being the product of the popular vote, but to respect the rule of law, the institutionality. Article 148 of the Constitution have been tampered with. By whom? By the President of the Republic, who is responsible for the crisis of this country.
The President of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, received the delegation of the Communist Party of China with the aim of deepening the map of cooperation between both nations. The delegation, led by the Vice Minister of the International Department of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, Li Mingxian, developed a working agenda with various Venezuelan sectors. They exchanged experiences to strengthen a strategic relation of integral binational cooperations and in areas such as solidarity, internationalism, and anti-imperialism. And let's take a short break, but first remember you can follow us on TikTok account at teleSUR English, in which you will be able to see news in different formats, news updates, and more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Ecuador is experiencing an intense and conflictive political situation after the president announced that he had signed the death cross decree, dissolving Congress in the midst of impeachment trial. We have more details.
President Guillermo Lasso announced he had signed Article 148 of the Constitution to dissolve Parliament, alleging political crisis and commotion in the country as the main reasons behind that decision.
In order to give Ecuador a constitutional solution, I have decided to apply Article 148 of the Constitution of the Republic, which grants me the power to dissolve the National Assembly due to a serious political crisis and internal commotion, for which I have signed Executive Decree number 741. In addition, I have requested the National Electoral Council to immediately call for legislative and presidential elections for the rest of the respective terms.
As a fundamental and constitutional act in itself, Article 148, the so-called death cross, gives power to the president to dissolve parliament, to govern for up to 6 months under the control of the Constitutional Court, and to call for presidential and legislative elections. After the announcement was made, the military forces and national police pledged their support to President Lasso's decision, asking Ecuadorians to respect it, as it was, they said, subjected to a constitutional norm.
The armed forces and the national police maintain and will maintain a firm position of absolute respect for the Constitution and their decision to protect the rights, liberties, and guarantees of the citizens within the framework of the rule of law. The position of the National Assembly to politically prosecute the President is based on a provision of the Fundamental Charter. Likewise, the decision of the constitutional president of the Republic to dissolve the National Assembly is based on Article 148 of the Constitution of the Republic. Therefore, it is subject to a constitutional norm and must be fully and completely respected by all citizens.
The National Assembly was militarized and several legislators and workers stayed outside the Legislative Palace while members of the armed forces and the National Police prevented their entrance. The deployment came facing possible protest as there was a clear popular discontent with the decision that impeded the impeachment trial over corruption charges against the head of state.
What Lasso did this morning is only one thing: to prevent the vote on the impeachment trial, which was in the end the trial of history. It was a last-minute strategy of a despised president who once again clings to power instead of resigning, going home and allowing Ecuador to rise again. But evidently, we could not be sure of that from a despised president, and a president who cares least about the people but only about his vanity, whims, and ambitions.
During an interview to Russian television, former Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa said that the President Guillermo Lasso's decision to dissolve the National Assembly and call for new elections was not constitutional, but said that in the end it was the best solution since it allowed the elections of new government that could respond much better to the needs of the Ecuadorian people.
Yesterday, he went to defend himself before the assembly, saying that the situation in the country was marvelous and stable, and today he declares death cross. That means anticipating elections. He dissolved the assembly, but there are also presidential elections, a parliamentary provision that is in the Constitution of 2008, precisely to overcome political crisis. I think that in the end, and in reality, it is the best solution that a new government is elected, because if Lasso goes out of office due to a political trial, he is replaced by his vice president, which is the same thing. However, we need to say that it is not constitutional because the grounds, at least the ground he's invoking, because the others are not valid, to anticipate elections due to a series of social commotion. That social commotion does not exist. What does exist is a political trial in full compliance with the Constitution.
Since April, President Lasso had been facing alleged then confirmed corruption charges. The Congress only needed 92 votes out of 137 to dismiss the current head of state, whose last resource to keep Congress from going ahead with the impeachment trial was signing Article 148 of the Constitution, the so-called death cross.
The government of Colombia and the National Liberation Army announced the resumption of peace talks after the pause requested by the insurgent group. The ELN communique states that they are resuming the ordinarization of the dialogue table after having made the first exchange of clarification on the recent interventions of President Gustavo Petro. They also reiterated their commitment to achieving this cycle by bilateral and national ceasefire agreements, the participation of society in the construction of peace, and humanitarian actions and dynamics. The document also ratifies the guerrilla group's first decision to remain at the table until a peace agreement is reached with the transformations that the country needs. Russia and Cuba called on Wednesday for concrete actions to revitalize bilateral trade. The call was made during the 11th meeting of the Business Committee held at the National Hotel in Havana with its businessmen of both countries. According to the president of the Cuban Chamber of Commerce, Antonio Carricante Corona, the meeting was attended by representatives of the 52 Russian and 106 Cuban companies. The Cuban official pointed out that since the last meeting held in Moscow back in September 2019, the scenario has changed to a more complicated business situation. Carricante said that now it was not only about analyzing supply possibilities, but also seeking alliance for national industrial productions. On the other hand, the trade representative of the Russian embassy in Havana, Sergei Baldin, said that in 2022 the bilateral exchange stood at $150 million, in which Russian exports tripled. On Wednesday, China's special envoy Li Hui met with Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba in Kiev in two-day visits as part of the European tour to promote Beijing's plan to settle the conflict with Russia. At a meeting, Kuleba praised the importance of China's mediating role, including in the Black Sea Initiative, which allowed the resumption of grain exports across the Black Sea, and its nuclear security. However, Foreign Minister assured his country does not accept any proposal that implies the loss of its territories or freezing of the conflict. Li Hui's visit comes into the context of the agreement reached in late April by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, and China, Xi Jinping, to attempt a mediation by Beijing, which part of the international community hopes can help at the end of the war. In France, the former president has announced that he will appeal to the Court of Accusation. His sentence will be adjusted. He will have to wear an electronic bracelet. 2 years after a first intense conviction, the court sentenced for the former president to 3 years in prison and banned Sarkozy from exercising his civil rights for the 3 years. The case is related to the financing of his campaign for 2007 presidential elections, which he won at the time. After the verdict was announced, the former president left the courtroom without testifying. His lawyer, Jacqueline Lafont, who was described the verdict as shocking, said they will appeal to the Court of Accusation. TeleSUR English continues to grow. You can now tune in from 33 different African countries through StarSat. Dial 461 and enjoy your Latin American alternative broadcast. On final short break, I will be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. More than 130 deaths reported as a result of heavy rains and winds from Cyclone Mocha in Myanmar. In the displaced people camps, the death toll in the coastal regions was 130 deaths. However, local resources indicate that the death toll could exceed 400. The United Nations Humanitarian Coordination Office called this scenario a disaster. Cyclone Mocha passed through the coastal regions in the nation, causing winds of more than 250 kilometers per hour and waves of more than 2 meters in weight. In Croatia, heavy rains were also reported, which caused floods in the country and surrounding areas. These have led to the declaration of the state of emergency in the central and southwestern areas of the country, specifically in the cities of Karlovac and Kostanjnica. Officials say that Požega County in Slovenia is one of the regions most affected by the floods. So far, authorities have not reported any fatalities. In Nigeria, at least 40 people were killed and severely injured after gunmen attacked two villages in the central state of Plateau. According to the local authorities, the incidents took place when groups of individuals allegedly from Fulani community attacked the village of Funsai and Kubwat. The causes of the attacks on the community members are still unknown. Investigations are underway to establish the facts and find the perpetrators. In Nigeria, there have been frequent clashes between nomadic herders and farmers over control of fertile land for grazing or crop production. The National Army is also confronting the radical Islamist group Boko Haram and criminal organizations in the north and center of the country, which use violence against the civilian population and kidnap people to demand cash ransoms for their release. In Saudi Arabia, a meeting of foreign ministers was held on Wednesday prior to the Arab summit scheduled for next Friday in Jeddah. During his speech, Algerian Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf welcomed the reinstatement of Syria's participation in the Arab League meetings. He added that it is necessary to intensify efforts to strengthen joint Arab action and neutralize the marginal tensions that divide Arab countries. For his part, the Syrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates, Faisal al-Medad, said that all the bills and laws presented during the meeting reflected the views to overcome the crisis and respect the role played by Syria at the regional and international level. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un inspected his country's first military reconnaissance satellite and approved a future action plan for its use, the Asian country's state-run media reported Tuesday. Kim met with the non-permanent satellite launch preparatory committee on Tuesday before viewing the satellite, the Korea Central News Agency reported. In December 2022, Pyongyang announced that a major final stage test had been conducted for the development of the device, while announcing its completion by April this year. The development of a military reconnaissance satellite is indicated by the North Korean leader as one of the key projects for the defense of the nation. And we have come to the end of this brief. You can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok as well. For TeleSUR English, I am Heidy Maurell. Thank you for watching.